Welcome to the Art of Being Nimble podcast. I'm Glenn Smith and I'm your host. In this series, we'll introduce you to business leaders from around the world who will interview about how they've overcome challenges of operating a business in today's dynamic world. Through their stories, we're going to hear about what problems they've had and how they fixed them and the benefits it's brought them. Importantly, you're going to learn some lessons about what you can then use in your organisation to do similar things. So let's get on with the show and hear the next story. I'm thrilled to have Andy Smith, a veteran in navigating the complex world of business and technology transformations, with 25 years' experience as a COO and CIO. Andy has been at the forefront of helping organisations make sense of their data to drive impactful change. From the early days of relational databases in the 90s to today's cutting-edge cloud technologies, Andy's journey is a masterclass in evolving with the times. Armed with a degree in mathematics and statistics, and is a certified Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt and Scared Agile practitioner, Andy's focus has always been clear: how to organise data for maximum benefit, not just technically, but strategically. Join us as Andy shares his insights on why the real secret to winning with AI isn't just about the latest tech buzzwords like ChatGPT, but about building solid data foundations. Get ready for a deep dive into the art and science of data quality and how it's reshaping the future of business. So Andy, thanks for joining us today to talk about big data and the cleansing of so we can use it within AI. I think let's kick off the conversation with the fact that there's a lot of hype around AI at the moment, and we're seeing organizations thinking about how they can use AI. But underlying that is the data that AI needs to be driven. And I'm interested in our conversation starting off to say, well, cleansing data and using good quality data, is this something new that you've been seeing organizations do?
Yeah, and good morning, Glenn. Yeah, no, it's absolutely not. I mean, AI is just the latest incarnation, but the reality is IT applications have always needed input data to process and produce output data. And that data needs to be of good quality. Otherwise, the age-old adage, garbage in, garbage out, is true. And AI is essentially the same, but on a gigantic scale, because training AI models requires masses and masses and masses of input data. And as we'll talk about as we go through the course of the conversation, if that data is not clean, if it's not accurate, if it's not complete, then the models that are being trained will be compromised. So data and the quality of data has been around for decades. It's just that now the spotlight is back on it as a necessary a necessary precondition for making sure that AI is successfully implemented.
Well, that's interesting, yes, and there's obviously a lot of attention around AI. But so the cleansing of data, I think you said it's obviously been around for some time. What do organizations, if I'm an organization and I'm thinking about, I want to use AI, my product set to improve my customer experience, maybe lower some costs, embed it in new products, and I've got a legacy set of data, where do I need to start? What do I need to start thinking about? Because I know there's going to be technical things here, but I'm guessing there's going to be business challenges that we need to overcome as well.
So it's interesting you said organizations have a legacy set of data. The reality for most organizations is they have an enormous number of legacy data sets. And understanding what they are, where they are, how they fit together is basically that's route one for getting your data quality in place. You've got to understand what your current position is. If you want a plan to get to a nice, pristine, clean data set, you've got to understand what your starting point is. So organizations really, if they don't already, some do, but an awful lot more will be in a position where they're not really completely clear where the data is, what data relates to what applications, et cetera, et cetera. So it's getting that baseline position. And unfortunately, there's no easy way of doing that. It takes effort, it takes time, it takes resources to essentially document the entire existing data landscape.
Okay.
And work out from there where the gaps are, where the overlaps are, and where any quality issues might be. And once you've got that foundation in place, you can then move that forward. Trying to plug data sets into AI or any other application for that matter, without really understanding what the data is that you're using, it's basically going to create lots of problems downstream.
Right. Okay. Well, and that makes sense. And as you said at the beginning, garbage in, garbage out. This feels then like this is not just a IT tech problem. This is that part of the organization is going to be probably the custodians of the technology that data sits on, but it feels like the business owners of the applications within the business need to get their hands around this problem as well.
That is spot on. And data doesn't exist in isolation, at least not in any commercial organization, right? If we look at scientific or R&D, yeah, fine. But in commercial organizations, data exists because companies have customers, they have products, they have suppliers, whatever it might be. So you're right. Every single data element in a commercial organization has a business hook, right? So it should have a business owner. Hopefully it does have a business owner. It certainly has a business hook. So it's really, really important as customers, as organizations, map out what their data landscape looks like, that for every data set, they also map out what are the applications that data services or the data that application produces, and what are the customer touch points for that application. So whether it's in the application process, if customers are looking to purchase a product or a service, whether it's in the decisioning around, and again, a lot of my background has been in financial services, I've been in lending, and financial organizations have to make decisions about whether they can take customers or they can't. So data sets can relate to those kind of use cases, those kind of elements on the customer journey, the end-to-end customer journey.
Yeah.
It's really important to overlay the data landscape onto the business landscape.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about the customer journey, because we've all experienced organizations that present to me as a customer and as the user a holistic approach that feels like they're joined up, even if the underlying system isn't. But we conversely also work with different companies as a customer where it feels like actually there's 3 different companies working in one organization that just happens to have the same logo glued on the webpage. So I would imagine in both of those situations, you've got different back-end applications that are doing different things, and they're going to have their own data sets.
That is often the key manifestation from a customer perspective of poor data, of a poor data fabric, right? So, and it very often is the fact that, let's say I've got 2 or 3 different products from the same company. Very likely those products will be serviced on different applications, on different technologies, and my data is going to be in there 3 times. Now, in an ideal world, the data is the same. So my name, my address, other information about me. Ideally, even if it's replicated 3 times in 3 different applications, it's the same. Yes. The reality is that very often, so particularly over time, that data, can get out of sync. So if I call up and say, look, I've changed my address and I'm talking on to product number 1, and they change my address on that system, very often it doesn't flow into the other systems, and you can get complete inconsistencies. And that's one of the very common issues that organizations have in terms of keeping their data clean. Now, ideally, when you're thinking about AI, it's going to be very inefficient to have AI models having to go to lots of different places to pick up data.
Indeed.
If you're going to bring it into a single location, and we can maybe get onto that later. If you bring all of the data into a single location and plug the AI models into that, that's going to be very efficient from the AI model perspective, but there's going to be a lot of work in making sure that you're not putting duplicate data in that process. So yeah, I think the customer experience here is in my mind, the customer experience is a great starting point, right? Understand the entire end-to-end customer journey, irrespective of whether it's one product, two products, three products, doesn't matter. So understand what that customer journey looks like, understand which of the data and applications are relevant at every point in that customer journey. And from there, you can start thinking about, okay, if we're going to use AI, if we're going to think about a particular use case, it's going to touch this part of the customer journey, this part of the customer journey. You then know what data you need to look at.
Yeah. And it's interesting to use the example of the address change. We as a family moved earlier in the year, and we had experienced that exact same problem where you speak to a company, and I remember a couple of instances, one where you spoke to one person and they had to change it on several systems, and they were, verbosely telling me this as they were on the call talking to the call center. And another instance with our car where we changed the address on, and they only changed part of it because where the car was and where the account was. And it's just things like that you think, 6 months later, you think, how is it I'm having to go back and fix these things? So it's not a great customer experience. So from that point of view, but if they were using that in some way, and, in the insurance process, I'm sure that was triggering some risk profile as well.
And in all likelihood, Glenn, that's probably a manual kind of playbook that says, if the customer calls in and wants to change the address, here are the 10 steps you need to follow, right? In system A, system B, system C, and they're literally just following a playbook. But they're doing it with you hanging on the phone, right? It's your time, it's your money, and they're happily describing what they're doing. Well, that's all very entertaining, but it's not really a value add for you as a customer.
No, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, you want to do it once and make sure it's done well. It's interesting. You talked about that sort of, where is the data? And I could imagine, having worked with organizations myself, helping them through many technology transformations over the years, if you think about a large enterprise, they're going to have huge amounts of data, and with the advent of cloud, and even if it's still on their old internal data centers, they're paying a lot of money to store that. I guess there's going to be a trade-off against maintaining the separate instances of that data, and versus them making a copy of it, and the easiness of having a single location for the AI to hit, versus paying for the having to go separately. I don't know whether there's any thoughts that businesses need to think about when they're thinking about how that technology solution might look like.
So I think actually one of the things that has happened over recent years and has accelerated with cloud is the cost of storing data has plummeted. If you think about it on a per terabyte basis, and you compare back to when companies had to have their own data centers, they had to have their own drive arrays, and in hermetically sealed rooms and all the rest of it. The cost to store per terabyte was multiples of what you can now achieve by going for cloud storage. So I don't think storage cost is a major driver. I think the big costs for having a legacy of poor quality and disparate data is actually the cost to the business, the cost on the business processes, the necessary manual things that you have to do, just the kind of things we've just been talking about, which are basically inefficient, very people heavy, and that is always going to be a bigger cost.
And so, if there is an organization that is using that playbook, those manual 10 steps that they're going through, is one of the things they need to think about is to look at to automate that? Or actually, I can imagine almost even AI might be helpful to automate that, because it probably deals well with the fuzzy side of life.
So, we talked about the fact that cleansing and making sure we've got excellent quality data is a prerequisite for AI and looking at how we can implement AI in certain use cases. Going through that process is also going to highlight some things that need to change within the data fabric itself. So if I'm cleaning data up, that's not a one-time. It can't be a one-time exercise. Right? I can't go through that whole process of cleaning it up and then 6 months later I'm back to where I started. So you then fundamentally have to change the business processes that sit behind how that happened in the first place. And in some cases there may be some technology things that need to change as well. but you've got to make sure that you take away the root cause of why the data was in the problems that it was in.
Sure.
So yes, I absolutely the process of going through of what we've been talking about will identify things that need to change both from a business side and also from a technology side.
So do you think, therefore, that people that are organizations that are going through that realize this is not just a product and technology change, but the fact that, as you articulate, if we're having to change business processes and we need to make these new BAU day-to-day activities to make sure we're always cleansing the data and that the data is in lines, that adds a whole level of complexity. This is just not a technology product change. This is an organizational change, and that's not potentially as a quicker fix as doing some technology.
But I think that was always the case. I mean, if I think back to the mid 1990s when relational databases first came to prominence and organizations were investing in Oracle, Sybase, Informix, those kind of things. The same was true. So they were moving from kind of hierarchical storage of data to relational storage of data, and that allowed, and in some cases necessitated, business processes to change, because the way users would access data in order to service customers changed. So it happened then in the early 2000s when cloud first appeared, when the internet first appeared. That resulted, and in some cases necessitated, business processes to change again. It allowed for customers, for example, to self-serve in a way that had never been possible, and that changed some of the processes around service because customers could do it themselves. AI is just the latest, incarnation of that paradigm, and I think it will. So organizations that are not thinking about using AI in order to change and improve business processes, in my mind, are thinking about AI in the wrong way.
Right. Okay. So based on what you've observed, and if you were talking to a new organization that was thinking about doing this, where is there any sort of typical models or suggestions of starting point of who should own this sort of activity? Because the fact it is product, data, and business process changes, my guess is that maybe having it buried deep under a CTO's organization is probably not the most effective way of making things happen.
Right. I mean, obviously, the very large organizations will have the luxury of being able to test bed all technologies, right, including AI. So they'll have their incubators that they'll be able to essentially prod and test and pull and see how things work. But of course, that doesn't necessarily inform anybody in terms of what they're going to use it for. It just means that they understand the technology, they understand how it works, and what the inputs and outputs are. But most organizations don't have that luxury, right? They don't have the resources, they don't have the investment money to be able to do that. So I think defining ownership is crucial, and plays back to my point that I made earlier about data itself, right? Every element of data in most organizations should have a defined owner, right? That owner has a responsibility for ultimately ensuring that the data is accurate, it's complete, and it's clean. And those owners should be business people, right? They should not be technology people. They should be business people. And so for me, the logical extension to that argument is that from an AI perspective, there should be business owners for each AI use case that is being contemplated, is being experimented, is being implemented. And therefore, it's incumbent on those business owners to understand how those models are going to work, what data is required as inputs to those models, and what the output is and how that impacts and touches customers. All of that needs to be understood and owned by somebody within the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, I mean, hearing you talk makes me think, you said, we talk about that the data should be owned by someone. I mean, no, should is quite a dangerous word. And I suspect that there are many organizations who, people may be listening to this thinking, yeah, there should be someone to own this application. I wonder who does. I can imagine that there are some businesses who maybe don't appreciate that data is an asset for them, and that asset needs to be cared for in the same way that you take your car for a service every year. You need to be maintaining any asset in the same way you paint the walls on the building that you're in as well. I don't know whether you've sort of, how you've articulated to people in the past about that this is something that you should really care for and in these weeding and watering.
I've worked in a number of organizations where the people in the business, and I mean from the top all the way down to the more junior levels, absolutely fundamentally believe that IT own the data in the organization.
Right.
And it's a technical thing. So the fact that they're sitting in front of a screen, they've got a customer on the end of a phone, and they're typing in customer information into a screen, they absolutely did not get the concept that they have a responsibility for ensuring that data is accurate and complete and all the rest of it. Similarly, if somebody within the business is running a query or running a report or producing some kind of decision based on a data set, they should understand what that data set is. They should understand how it's produced, how it's created, and the impact that data set is having on the decision that they're about to make. That is what data ownership is all about. It's not simply about pressing a button, downloading a spreadsheet from somebody, producing a decision, and then simply assuming that decision is correct, without really having a proper understanding of the input data. Then there's no guarantee that the decision you're making is correct.
And while it clearly makes sense that technology can help support the cleansing and validation or whatever, putting that burden under the broadly on the shoulders of a CTO and their organisation would be, by sound of from what you're saying, obviously is a not fair for them, because but no disrespect to technology organizations, they don't necessarily have the full context. They are a service provider at the end of the day.
A couple of years ago, I was working in an organization that had over time their data structure had become really very opaque. The governance had become quite weak. There was no consistent documentation around data. There wasn't even a common taxonomy. There wasn't even a common understanding of, if I have an address, do we have the same definition of what the address is, right? It's something just as basic as that. And it went all the way through the business. So we implemented a project to do a complete cleanup, to have a single data catalog. All the definitions were made common. And the one thing we did was for every business critical data element, we defined the business owner. And I remember the conversation. I remember sitting across the table from people and saying, right, you are now the business owner for this data. And the kind of look of horror on their faces until you describe what does that mean? So this is what we expect, right? That you are basically going to have to put processes in place for making sure that you understand and you can attest that this data is right, it's accurate, it's complete, and it's clean. And once you get people to that place, they actually then tend to become quite possessive. There's a kind of a light bulb moment goes on, and then if anybody is wanting to kind of touch their data, they get very protective, which frankly is what you want.
Yes, indeed.
Those are exactly the kind of attributes you want to see across the business. It doesn't have to be a technical job. It's not like we're taking a job from the technology team and putting it into the business. It should always have been a business responsibility in the first place. It just gravitated to the tech guys because physically the data sat in pieces of technology.
Sure. I just wonder, that makes me thinking about how this was obviously going to be a challenge for organizations. Like I said, this has been happening for a long time, and it's not a new problem. If we go back, 10 to 15 years, when more organizations had more custom development of their own products, etc., quite rightly now, for good commercial and sense, many organizations are in a buy versus build mode. And so, especially with software as a service, I'm just wondering how much harder this may now be if you're if you're not a big organization and you're using many software as a service type products. that data is in the cloud, but it's not your cloud, it's the provider's cloud, and how what a level of complexity that may add to this process that we're articulating.
I mean, the principle is exactly the same, right? Because most organizations have ended up with islands of data, and the islands of data are related to the individual applications or whatever. Whether those applications sit in the company's physical data center, or whether they sit on a server sitting by somebody's desk, or whether they're sitting on an application in the cloud, it doesn't really matter. The problem is basically that the data is all over the place. I think potentially where organizations that are moving towards software as a service in a big way, so they're looking to some organizations have the benefit of being able to essentially dual platform. So they have their legacy environment, and they can build out a software as a service legacy technical stack side by side. And perhaps it's because they've got different products and they can differentiate by product. And over time, the SaaS piece will grow. The beauty is that if people get into defining their data strategy for that SaaS environment, if they do that early, then they can avoid the problems of all this unclean data. They can avoid that reoccurring in that new environment. But if they don't do that, then all they're going to do is build out the same issues in the SaaS environment that they've had in the legacy environment.
Sure, and like you say, it makes sense to do that at the beginning. I always sort of slightly cringe when I speak to organizations and they're moving to the cloud and they're talking about a lift and shift. And it's like, well, you're picking up all the bad parts of the solution and not thinking about how do we optimize. So yeah, it's the same sort of
Exactly that. I mean, I've had the benefit and the privilege of working with startups, and in fact, last year I was working on a startup, and being able to define the data strategy from day one before anybody starts, building out on any cloud platform is absolutely, it's just great. Because you know that you're building a solid foundation, a data foundation on which you can then build out all of the applications and prevent all of those kind of issues from happening. But of course, most organizations aren't in that position.
No, absolutely.
So there's an element of, okay, and it's all contextual, right? So if I'm an organization that's been around for 3 to 5 years, I will have built up some data technical debt, right? But that might very well be something that I can put an investment case together to quite quickly fix. If I've been around for 25, 30, 40, 50 years as an organization, that investment case is much, much harder to put forward and get approved. So you need a different approach. And I think that your example is the right one. I think those kind of organizations that have been around for a very long time, they have to basically, it's the old adage of how do you eat the elephant, right? You've got to do it slice by slice. But you need to have an overall plan. You need to have an overall view. You need to understand what that landscape looks like so that you can decide which slices to go for in which order.
Yeah, that makes sense because, key believer that, many organizations are not necessarily great at prioritizing and sequencing work. So you need to at least understand that understands the space that you've got, and you can work out, because there's no, if you've got a product that's near end of life, making an investment would seem short-sighted.
And I'm not talking about like a 1-year plan. I'm talking about probably a minimum of a 5-year plan. Wow. And we all know that in business, 5-year plans tend to be a little bit on the woolly side, right? if things can change, they will, and of course, that can throw your plan out. And so the plan has to be sensible, but it also has to be flexible. So if business priorities change, and they will, because they do, then the plan needs to be able to be adapted. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to achieve is to get from A to B. A being, a data environment that is not really fit for purpose. And in the context of AI, in my view, will hold back any business benefit that implementing AI is looking to achieve. You need to get to B, right? And if A to B is going to take 5 years, it's going to take 5 years, right? There's no shortcut, unfortunately, in any of this. But it's a question of which particular slices of the elephant you need to do first, because that will potentially unlock your ability to implement AI in a particular use case or a particular part of the customer journey. That's absolutely fine to do it piece by piece in that sense. But I'm picking 5 years. But that long-term plan needs to be something that is there from the get-go.
And they need the organization to have a vision to help direct that plan as well, so they know where they're doing that. I think that's it's interesting. I think, as we're talking, it's making me think about product management as a discipline, and many organizations are not as strong as they could be for their own products doing product management. But this almost feels like there needs to be internal product management of the, from like that business owner about what are we trying to achieve and how do I do that, and having those sorts of skills. So maybe this is where I'm hypothesizing, if you've got an organization that currently sort of burdens the technology department to own this data, and they're quite rightly trying to find business owners to do that, actually, if technology has got product management capability in it, they can sort of support the business owner with the skills and the development they need to think about, to help them think about, well, what is the vision for this application, and how might we go forward?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, your product management needs to be in the business, because
I agree.
Because those decisions that need to be taken have to have a commercial hook. In a transition phase, I think, yes, if you've got product management skills in the technology organization, absolutely use those. But the decision making needs to be within the business itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. We're talking about data, but there are lots of other areas where that is also true. So if you think about how organizations manage change more generally, you and I have spoken previously about using agile versus waterfall techniques, et cetera. There are going to be people across the organization in technology and elsewhere in the business who understand how those kind of methodologies work, and it's absolutely fine to pull those resources and pull that expertise in on a cross-functional basis, because those are assets within the organization that should be leveraged if they exist.
No, absolutely. So I guess if we sort of summarize, then I think it seems like if an organization is dabbling with AI, thinking about what opportunities it can do, understanding their existing data landscape and looking through that lens of the customer seems really sensible, because obviously it focuses on why are we here? If we're focusing on the customer, I'm a general believer, you keep your customer happy, then the money flows. Happy customers generally spend money. And we are obviously there, we need to find those business owners, and we need to understand that landscape to work out how do we cleanse and put that, also change the data cleansing process in place, but also work out how do we not do it now and then have to redo it all again in 5 years' time, which will become very tiresome. So I just think just looping back though, we touched briefly on the word governance. What should organizations be thinking of about what we haven't already talked about in respect to governance for this? What are there practices and policies, or are there even meetings or whatever that ways of working that they should be thinking about how they might embed into their organization?
Yeah, I mean, and again, my background being in financial services heavily regulated. The regulator typically would expect, certainly medium to large organizations, and increasingly even the smaller organizations, to have a published data governance policy as part of their general IT controls. So you'd expect a data governance policy would usually mandate you had some kind of data governance committee or oversight group that on a periodic basis would be looking at the data landscape. They would be getting reports and information about data quality and where the organization had uncovered issues in data quality. They would be responsible for ensuring that those issues were fixed. They would be responsible for reporting up to the ExCo or leadership team or even the board of directors on that kind of progress, because fundamentally the regulator could drop in at any point and ask the directors, ask the board to give them information about the quality of data in their organization. And without that governance structure, you'll end up with a lot of people running around for weeks trying to pull data together, and regulators can smell that from a million miles away. So yeah, data governance is and again, I think a lot of organizations have this, and this is not something I'm suggesting, it's a big problem for most organizations. But if you've got that data governance, that is a great place to start in terms of mapping out what the end-to-end landscape looks like.
Brilliant. Fabulous. And just as we close out the conversation, Andy, is there any other points that people you think organizations should be thinking about if they're wanting to look at starting this journey and making sure, and even if it's someone having to go and explore, does this even exist in my business at the moment?
Yeah, I think for me the top three kind of takeaways for people listening are, number one, get to a point where you really have a holistic view of your organization's data. Right, you've got a common taxonomy, a common language around data definition. You've got a documented data model, so you understand how all the different pieces of data fit together within that model. You understand the hierarchy, so you understand where the single source of truth is for a particular data element. Right, it's often called the gold standard of a particular data element. That you understand the difference between operational and transactional data, and you can divide your data sets into those two, and you've got the governance that we talked about before. So that's kind of the first point. Second point is have a plan around how you're going to bring all these various islands of data together. Are you going to adopt a migratory approach? So you're going to take the data from where it is today and you're going to migrate it into a single data warehouse or a data lake or whatever? Or are you going to go for an integration approach? So you're going to basically join together all of these different islands of data so that you've got a holistic view. You can access the data you need to access, but you don't actually move the islands themselves. So and that's a fundamental strategic decision, and you've got to look at business impact of that as well as the technology and investment impact. So that's number two. And then the third, and again coming back to the AI point, is absolutely use the customer journeys, and that may involve going back and mapping those customer journeys and documenting them, because it may not have actually been done before. Use those customer journeys to identify the potential AI use cases and identify the data sets and where they are, where they sit, that will then be used in those AI models that will support those AI use cases. Start from the customer journey and work up to the AI use case, not the other way around. I think those are the three kind of takeaways for me.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much for summarising. I think that's sounds like something that people actually could be doing. And I think it's very topical because of AI, but many other reasons as well. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Andy. Much appreciated. I've enjoyed the conversation. And if listeners want to get in touch to talk to you, I'm assuming they can find you on LinkedIn nice and easy?
They can find me on LinkedIn. A quick search, Andy Smith Luxit, Luxit, will bring me up. They can go to my website, luxit.co.uk.
Fabulous. Thank you very much.
Good to talk to you, Glenn.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I've had fun making it. I'd be thrilled to hear your feedback or suggestions for topics you'd like me to explore. Email the show at podcast@nimbility.co. You can also check out all the other episodes in the series at nimbility.co/podcast. If you've enjoyed the content, it would mean a lot to us if you could subscribe and rate the show in your podcast app. Your support helps others discover the show and allows us to keep spreading the word. So until next time, thanks for listening.